Hook. Have you ever been punished for doing exactly what you were told was right? Imagine spending years believing you followed every rule only to be hit with a $12,000 fine, your credit ruined, and your faith in fairness shattered. That was me. But 5 years later, fate handed me something I never expected, a $75,000 check, a broken bar signed by the very man who once destroyed my peace. Thought it started on a windy Tuesday in April, one of those days where the sky can't decide if it wants to rain or shine. I was standing in the middle of my half-finished living room, watching the contractors pull out the old windows that had been leaking since the day I bought the house. My wife, Emily, was upstairs rocking our 6-month-old son, and for the first time in months, I felt a strange flicker of hope. We'd bought our townhouse 5 years earlier, in a cozy little community called Maple Ridge Estates. It looked like the perfect place to start a family. Tree-lined sidewalks, friendly neighbors, well-kept lawns. But behind all that charm lurked something I didn't yet understand: the absolute power of a homeowners association. Before we began the renovation, I'd done everything by the book. I submitted the request forms, attached photos, and even sat through an home meeting where they discussed approved window styles. The president, a gray-haired man named Mr. Hawthorne, nodded when I showed him the sample. "Looks good, Daniel," he said. "As long as they match the exterior, you're fine." Those 4 words, "you're fine," would come back to haunt me. The new windows looked amazing. They made the house brighter, warmer, and quieter. For a moment, life felt good again. But about 6 months later, an envelope arrived in the mail, a thick, official-looking, stamped with the HOA seal. I tore it open. Notice of violation: unauthorized window replacements not in compliance with HOA design guidelines. Immediate corrective action required. Fine, $12,000. At first, I laughed. It had to be a mistake. I called the HOA office, confident it would be sorted out quickly. But the woman on the phone, her voice clipped and cold, said, "All exterior modifications must have written approval." "We have no record of it." I protested. I reminded her of the meeting. I even sent photos of the signed request. But she replied, "Verbal approval is not binding." Without written documentation, the fines stand. Emily cried that night. We didn't have $12,000 to spare, not with diapers, a mortgage, and a single income while she stayed home with the baby. I begged them to reconsider, attended meetings, and appealed the fine. Each time, Hawthorne sat across the table, arms crossed, that same indifferent look on his face. "We have to enforce the rules equally," he said. "Otherwise, chaos." I wanted to scream. Chaos? For windows that were identical to the ones in the next unit? Months turned into years. They placed a lien on our home, reported us to collections, and our credit tanked. Every time I saw Hawthorne walking his golden retriever down the street, something burned inside me. But I couldn't afford a lawyer, so I paid the fines in installments, one painful check after another, until it was finally over. Or so I thought. Because 5 years later, everything changed. By then, I had left my old job and started my own contracting business, installing energy-efficient windows and doors. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I treated every client with honesty, the way I wished someone had treated me back then. Then one day, I got a call from a local development company. "We're working on a large renovation project for a private community," the project manager said. "We need a reliable installer for about 30 homes. The HOA president personally recommended we reach out to you." When he said the name of the community, I froze. Maple Ridge Estates. The same neighborhood, the same man. I almost turned it down. But something inside me, something deeper than pride, told me to take the job. Not out of revenge, but because I needed closure. I wanted to walk back into that place not as the man they humiliated, but as someone who had built something on his own terms. 2 months later, I was sitting in a conference room, papers spread across the table. The project had gone perfectly, no complaints, no issues. And at the head of the table, wearing the same smug expression but with a few more wrinkles, was Mr. Hawthorne. He looked up, pen in hand. "Daniel Harper, Right, excellent work. We're very happy with the results." He scribbled his signature across the check, a $75,000 payment for the completed project, and slid it across the table. Our eyes met. For a second, he didn't recognize me. Then his face changed, just slightly, and that was when I smiled, not out of spite, but because I finally realized something profound. Sometimes, life doesn't pay you back in apologies, it pays you back in irony. For a long moment, I just stared at that check, at the thick paper, the bold numbers, the blue ink still drying from his pen. $75,000, my name printed across the front like it belonged there, and across from me sat the man who once made me feel like I didn't belong anywhere at all. Mr. Hawthorne cleared his throat. "You've done excellent work," he said, sliding the check toward me as though it weighed nothing. "Our community is grateful." I could have said 1,000 things, about the sleepless nights, about the humiliation of standing in front of my neighbors, begging for fairness, about how that $12,000 fine had nearly cost us our home. But instead, I smiled. "I appreciate that, Mr. Hawthorne. I'm glad you're happy with it." He hesitated, eyes narrowing just slightly. I could tell something was stirring in his mind, a faint memory trying to surface. "Have we met before?" he asked. My heart hammered once, then I decided to let him remember on his own time. "I think we've crossed paths," I said softly. When I walked out of that conference room, check in hand, the late afternoon sun hit the parking lot in a golden haze. I stood there for a minute, breathing it in. I thought about Emily, about the nights we'd stayed up at the kitchen table wondering how to pay the bills, about the arguments, the fear, the resentment that had almost broken us. And suddenly, all of it felt a broken bar worth it. That evening, when I got home, Emily was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. Our son, now 5, was coloring at the table, humming to himself. I held out the check wordlessly. She blinked, then gasped. "Danielle, a broken bar, is this a question mark?" I nodded. "Maple Ridge." She looked down at the paper again, realization dawning. "Him?" "Yep." Her hand flew to her mouth, and then she started laughing. That kind of laughter that comes not from humor, but from relief, from the feeling that the universe finally got something right. That night, we didn't talk about revenge. We talked about peace. Over the next few weeks, I finished the Maple Ridge project. Every time I drove past my old townhouse, I felt a mix of emotions: pain, nostalgia, pride. The new owners had repainted the front porch, planted new flowers. They didn't know the history behind those windows, and that was okay. The story didn't belong to the house anymore. It belonged to us. About a month later, I was called back for a follow-up meeting, a standard post-project review. When I arrived, Hawthorne was waiting alone in the meeting room. No contractors, no board members, just him and a thick folder of paperwork. "Daniel," he said quietly, as I took a seat. "I remember now." I didn't say anything. He sighed, rubbing his temple. "The window's a broken bar. That was you, wasn't it?" "The fine." I nodded once. His shoulders sank a little. "You know, I looked back through those old records. You were right. You had approval. The document was misfiled under another address. It never should have happened." For a long time, I'd imagined this moment, him admitting it, maybe even apologizing. But standing there, I realized I didn't need to hear anything more. I'd already moved past it. Still, I looked him in the eye and said, "You cost me a lot, Mr. Hawthorne. But you also taught me something valuable." He frowned slightly. "What's that?" "That doing the right thing isn't about following rules, it's about integrity. And sometimes, the people enforcing the rules have none." He nodded, almost sadly. "You're right," he murmured. "I was a broken bar, too rigid back then, too afraid of losing control. I suppose I thought order was more important than people." He stood, extended his hand. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry." I hesitated for a heartbeat, then shook it. His grip was weaker than I remembered. Maybe time had softened him. Maybe guilt had. Either way, it didn't matter anymore. When I left that meeting, I didn't feel vindicated. I felt free. A few months later, my business took off in ways I couldn't have imagined. The Maple Ridge project had opened doors to new clients, new neighborhoods, and new partnerships. We hired more workers, bought better tools, and moved into a small office. On the wall of that office, next to my business license, I framed a copy of that $75,000 check not as a trophy, but as a reminder, a symbol of how sometimes life writes its own justice. One day, my son asked about it. "Dad," he said, pointing at the frame, "why do you keep that check there?" I smiled, ruffling his hair. "Because that's proof, buddy. Proof that even when the world seems unfair, if you keep doing the right thing, if you stay honest and don't give up, things come back around." He thought about that for a second, then grinned. "So broken bar like karma?" "Exactly," I said, "just a little slower sometimes." He nodded, satisfied, and went back to playing with his toy trucks. I looked at that check one last time before turning off the lights for the night, and in the quiet of the empty office, I whispered to myself, not with anger, but with gratitude. "You signed the fine, Mr. Hawthorne. But in the end, a broken bar, you also sign my freedom." Moral: sometimes life's greatest payback isn't revenge, it's success, peace, and knowing that you rose above what tried to break you.